Please be seated. On behalf of Oakbank Baptist Church, I want to welcome you here to the service and celebration of the life of a wonderful man, Greg Groenheide. It is good to see so many faces and people gathered in support of the family. Few things to draw your attention to should the need arise. Washrooms are located on the east side of the building, both upstairs and down. Afterwards, there will be a time of fellowship and refreshments, and should the need be there, we do have an elevator located in our back hallway, and the ushers would be glad to help you. As of right now, let us spend a few moments in prayer in preparation for the service together. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for a life well lived, for a man well loved, and for a time to celebrate and reflect and remember, to laugh, to mourn, and to experience the full range of emotion. And I pray, Lord, that you would be our comfort and peace in this time, and we pray for the family for this very fact, that you, Lord, would shed your peace on this situation at this time and in the days to come. We thank you for this time together. We dedicate this day and this service to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good afternoon. My name is Cal DeCastro. I am one of Greg's in-laws. I'm married to Teresa. We're going to be singing a song this afternoon. So if you are able, if you're comfortable, please stand as we sing. Of grace is Jesus my Redeemer. There is no more for heaven now to give. He is my joy, my righteousness and freedom, my steadfast love, my deep and boundless peace. To this I hold. My hope is only Jesus, for my life is wholly bound to His. Oh, how strange and divine, I can sing. All is mine, yet not I, but through Christ in me. Savior, He will stay. I labor on in weakness and rejoicing, for in my need His power is displayed. To this I hold, my shepherd will defend me through the deepest valley. He will dread, I know that I'm forgiven. The future sure, the price it has been paid. For Jesus bled and suffered for my pardon, and He was raised to overthrow the grave. To this I hold, my sin now forever is my plea.
shall repeat, yet not I, but through Christ in me. Yet not I, but through Christ in me. Yet not I, but through Christ in me. You can all have a seat.
You said you'd come and share all my sorrows. You said you'd be there for all my tomorrows. I came so close to sending you away, but just like you promised, you came there to stay. I just had to pray, and Jesus said, "Come to the water, stand by my side. I know you are thirsty, you won't be denied." I felt every teardrop when in darkness you cried, and I strove to remind you that for those tears I died. Jesus, I give you my heart and my soul. I know that without God I'd never be whole. Savior, you open all the right doors, and I thank you and praise you from earth's humble shores. Take me, I'm yours. And Jesus said, "Come to the water, stand by my side. I know you are thirsty, you won't be denied." I felt every teardrop when in darkness you cried, and I strove to remind you that for those tears I died.
I'm short like a Groenheide. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm the younger brother of Greg, as everybody knows. In loving memory to Greg Cornelius Groenheide, June 6, 1955 to January 18, 2023. Greg passed away on January 18, 2023 at a young age of 67 at the palliative care unit in St. Joseph Hospital in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. He was surrounded by his beloved wife, loving wife, and 45 years, Lorraine Jansen, and his 4 children, Heidi, Kevin, Teresa, and Katie. Greg was born June 6, 1955, at St. Boniface Hospital in Winnipeg, Manitoba. As a young child, he spent many happy years living on the family dairy farm in Stonewall, Manitoba. The Groenheides moved to Winnipeg when Greg was 8 years old. He attended River East Collegiate and left before graduating to work, but years later completed his GED and obtained his high school diploma. Greg worked in the roofing industry for a long time. He was a teen and he began being with Oakwood from its beginning. Greg worked alongside Harry Bosma, both at Oakwood Roofing and in other ventures. For a long time, friendship made them like brothers. Greg loved his work and took great satisfaction in his work and worked hard and with integrity.
Being outdoors, in nature, and out of range of telephones or television was Greg's happy place. His family has many fond memories of various camping trips taken while growing up, and in more recent years of trips to the island and Lake of the Woods. He was always eager to take people out on the boat to try and catch some fish, and despite his competitive nature, was still proud, even when someone else caught the bigger one. Greg was a wonderful storyteller, and his children even now vividly recall sitting around the campfire or the Ole Bone, learning about his childhood adventures and hearing about how Morton the turtle came from Scotland to Canada and why it's important to be your own green self instead of yellow. In close competition with the island for Greg's leisure time was dirt track racing. A race was one of the few things that could get him to stay away from the island for a weekend in the summer. Family came first for Greg, but he was always very involved in his community. He played, reffed, and coached hockey. He was involved in the Oakbank Community Club, even acting as a president for a time.
Okay, where am I at here? Greg was an active member of the Oakbank Baptist Church, volunteering with Boys Battalion and men's groups, often helping with or leading fishing trips. Greg was predeceased by his parents, Jan and Nellie, and his father-in-law, John. He is survived by his wife, Lorraine, children Heidi, Kevin and Kate, Teresa and Kel, Katie and Fritchard, and his grandchildren, Eli, Charlotte, Claire, and Arthur, Milo and Ava, Emma, Olivia, and August. Siblings, Jack and Teeny, Marion and Jerry, Bill and Jenny, Shirley and Bill, Ronnie, Jim and Jeanette, and Jeff and Jerry. Lorraine's family, her Mary, her brother Ron, her sister Valerie, and numerous extended family and great friends. He was dearly loved, and he will be greatly missed.
My name is Harry Bosma, and before I get into this, maybe too long a thing I started, but it is what it is. I have to say, Lorraine, that I have gotten so many phone calls from acquaintances and friends and work co-workers from all over Canada that worked with Greg, and they wanted me to express our condolences to you. Yeah, this is going to take me a minute. I'm here to honor Greg and to relate to you the relationship we had, and it all started when we were all quite young. He started hanging around with my younger brothers, and as there was less rules at our place, Greg just became a regular and one of the 4 boys at the Bosma's place. We shared a lot of things together, including lickings we often got, and my mom did not discriminate. Yeah. We needed money, so we did the things that all young boys do, and in those days, you had to work to get that money, and that's what we started doing. We found jobs, or I found jobs for all of us to do, and we earned some cash, and that's how we got things done, and that's how we progressed to where we are now. Greg often joked, and he said the reason why he never left me is because I still owed him back pay, and that's the only way he would ever collect. In 1977, my wife and I started Oakwood Roofing. Greg was at our side the whole time, and the first jobs we took, and we never looked back. I have a plaque on the wall in our office that says, Greg Groenheide, the best employee for the last 37 years, and I think that was hung on the wall 8 years ago. He still is the best one we've ever had, and he still gets that honor. In the year 1988, the apprenticeship and trades qualification recognized a roofer as a trade. February 16, 98, the certificate of qualification roofer was presented to Greg Cornelius Groenheide. What's even more significant about this is Greg was the first. He was the number 1. And in my eyes, he still is number 1. That plaque is here also for you to see. The majority of the time we shared over the last 55 plus years together were related to work. We considered ourselves blessed to have done that. It provided us with so many opportunities, not just to feed our families, but also to enrich the lives of so many people that we came in contact with. Greg loved to help anyone he could. He set an example to all those he worked with, and he freely passed on his knowledge to anyone who would listen, and has mentored and helped so many of the men that still work in the industry today. His passion to get involved with both his time and resources with such organizations as Shalom Mission, Youth for Christ, Charis Center, Union Gospel speaks highly of his belief in God. He allowed his faith in Jesus to be his guide in everything he did. There was never any doubt as to where Greg stood. Greg loved to work. He worked in the north, and one particular job in Joe Haven, he and his men, and just to give you an idea of what Greg was really like and how determined he was, he and his men were up there. It was so cold. The job was months behind, and he phoned me, and we were talking about it, like all the tools were breaking, nothing was working. He was on the roof working at 45 below, and he sees an individual sitting across the way from the building they're working on, and the door is wide open. The guy's sitting on a recliner chair. He's got a beer in his hand, and he's looking at them, and he's laughing. And Greg is saying to me, look at that idiot sitting there with the door wide open, looking at us, laughing. And then it dawned on him. He says, oh, I'm the idiot, he says. Just a little thing about the conversations that Greg and I had, and you had to be there and know what he meant by that, and it made it very precious. On another occasion, while working in Churchill, we decided to go scouting around. We often did that when we had, some time on our hand. So he and I went. We drove all over the country. We had this old car that we rented and drove up and down the beaches. And they used to use the area for bombing in the old days, practice runs. So we found a shell. It was a beautiful shell. And I wanted to take that darn thing home. And the time Greg is telling me, Harry, I don't know if we should be doing this. We should be taking it. So I threw it in the back of the car, and we were literally bouncing all over the roads because those roads were horrible. And that thing would just, you could hear it banging in the back of the car. Finally, Greg convinced me. He says, Harry, we got to take this to an official and ask about this thing. Well, okay, we did that. And the guy comes out, and he opens the trunk and looks. Man, 11, he gets us all out of there, calls the bomb squad, says it's a live bomb, you can't have this thing. And that's when I thought, whoa, Greg is brave. He stuck through with me in this whole time. It was just some of the fun that we had, and it was, interesting times. Another occasion, my wife and the kids went to Churchill, and we visited when Greg was living up there, and he was doing a roof up at the Harbors Board. So we went up on the roof, and I encouraged my wife to come up, and she wouldn't come any further than the top level and could just kind of look over the edge. And my kids, the 3 little girls, were up on the roof with me, and we were all talking to Greg, and they're running all over the roof. You have to understand, this roof is 120 feet off the ground. There's no edge. It's sloped. It's totally illegal what we did. And my wife is having a bird, and so finally, after a lot of persuasion and yelling at us, I got him to come down and off the roof. And as we were getting into the car, getting ready to leave, we heard a terrible scream. And we just heard this, ah! And we looked up, and we see this body falling off the roof. And bang, it hit the ground. Of course, we're terrified. We run over there. We're panic-stricken and wonder who it is. And we come up and realize it's a snowmobile suit with a roll of felt paper in it. And Greg and the guys were just laughing their heads off on the top of the roof, thinking, oh, man, we got them good. And they did. And, yeah. And we went on many fishing trips together, and a lot of the guys there here that, that was a way that we would entertain or get to know our clients and our friends. And so a lot of these fishing trips we went out together were for our own enjoyment. And those were very precious moments, and everybody knows how much Greg loved nature. Greg loved nature so much he hated hunting, and yet he went hunting with me. And we were going down the river. I had my rifle in the boat with us, and we're going down, and we see this moose, and I'm scrambling to grab my rifle, and Greg starts yelling, "Run, moose, run, run!" He's yelling at the top of his voice, "Run, moose, run!" And yeah, I fired off about 3 shells at that moose, and then I realized I'm out of bullets. And I turned the boat into shore. I said, "Greg, get out. Watch where the moose is." And I jumped back in the boat, rushed all the way back to the camp, and about 25 minutes later, I come back, and I see Greg standing behind a tree like this. It's a little tree. And he said, "Where did you go, you idiot? You were trying to get me killed?" And I said, "Why? Where's the moose?" He said, "The moose is right there in the bush." And so he and I went in there and got the moose. When we got there, I had such an adrenaline rush that I passed out. And Greg had to haul me back to camp. It took him 2 hours to revive me and get me going again. And we went back, and that just trying to relate to you what kind of guy he was and how he stuck with me. And I would charge in and do stupid things, and he would sit back, take the time and do it right, and looked after us. Greg never stopped doing that. He's always been there for us as a company and for so many people. Yeah. For the past several weeks, I have been struggling as to what to say here today. How can I properly relay or define the man Greg? How can I do him justice and honor him as he deserves? I can tell you that Greg was a leader and that everyone at Oakwood loved and admired him. He loved to teach, show others the way, and was respected by all his peers. He had a great sense of humor, and he was possibly the most stubborn man I have ever met. The hardest working and caring individual I have ever known. He married his first and only love and worked relentlessly for them to provide for her and her children. His faith and love for God was unshakable, and I can tell you I have never known a more honest and honorable man in my life. At the end, I was very fortunate and grateful to have been able to spend some time with Greg. The last day, when we had the Christmas party at work, he was there, and Wayne brought him, he spent 4 hours there. And I went up to him after everybody else had been there, and I took his hand, and he squeezed mine, and I told him, "Greg, I love you." That's all I could say. Thank you.
I'm Wayne Sonnerberg. I'm a friend of Greg's. Cornelius Greg Groenheide. This was Greg's given name. Not sure if too many people knew him as Cornelius. He did legally change his name to Greg. I got to know Greg about 30 years ago. I don't remember exactly how Greg and I became friends. I know it was here in Oak Bank. We were both in our 30s then, working hard to make a go of things. It wasn't easy street. Work was hard to find, interest rates were high, and our families were young. But somehow we had time to become friends. Attending church and playing hockey were the social activities of the week. As time went on and our kids got older, we did have time for other things. Greg valued and was involved in his community. He was always helping people in many different ways within the community. When the community club wanted to expand the arena, Greg was there. The arena needed additional changing rooms, so they added onto the side of the building. There were many evenings when Greg and Doug would be out on the roof installing the torch-on roofing system. And I was told that this was done during the winter season. When the club purchased a newer Zamboni, Greg was there. It was an electric Zamboni from the city of Edmonton. Greg and Andy sourced it out, and Greg made arrangements to get it to Oak Bank. He was always willing to help out with community needs. Greg was also president of the community club. It was in his tenure that the club made changes to improve the club and sports in this community. He was instrumental in drafting up a contract to see that the club would receive an extra $50,000 over a 10-year period. He was able to pen his name to the contract that would see the arena become the Oak Bank Insurance Arena. And that naming rights contract for the arena was renewed after the initial 10-year contract expired. It was Greg's leadership that made this possible. Greg enjoyed hockey and played on many different teams. He also coached a number of teams through the years. I got the privilege of playing hockey with Greg here in Oak Bank. Greg possessed the skill and ability that would have taken him to the NHL had he had that opportunity. Greg also became a referee. He had a good eye for the game and called things fairly. He liked to let the players play the game. Greg loved country music and stock car races. I was just reminded that he also loved Southern gospel. I will not comment on his music of choice, but the radio was usually turned off when we were traveling together. Greg loved stock car racing. He was not one to drive fast on the roads, but loved getting behind the wheel of a race car. I think it was his midlife crisis. He put together a crew and started racing with a car. He needed more speed and power, so he moved up in classes and then later on moved on to the truck class. Greg was the driver, that is, until he crashed and damaged his foot. He continued racing with many different drivers and even put his son Kevin behind the wheel. Tuesday nights were spent at the shop with a crew to fix and repair, getting things ready for the Thursday night races. Greg was well respected by the track officials, other racers, and his crew. As you can see, Greg was a leader in his own right. He was not out there making speeches to influence people. He usually did it one-on-one. Greg valued the people around him. He valued each and every one of you here today. We are here today because of Greg and how he influenced our lives. Yesterday, Audrey and I were at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, and on the 5th level, you will find an area where there's some plaques. And on one of the plaques, you will find Greg Groenheide. His legacy will be remembered. I promised Lorraine that I would not bore you with a bunch of adventures that Greg and I had, but I would be making a mistake if I would not mention the island. Greg, Harry, and Brian purchased this island on Lake of the Woods, situated a 45-minute boat ride from Kenora. It has a great old cabin with lots of other buildings on the island. It needed lots of work, and Greg was the project manager. He was always looking for able-bodied people to join him out there, and it usually entailed a bunch of projects to do. The island was very secluded, no phone, no cell service. And as we both got older, Lorraine would not let Greg go out by himself. So usually on Wednesday afternoons, I would get this phone call. Wayne, I'm planning to go to the island Friday around noon. Well, I knew what that meant. It would be a long afternoon, as we'd have to stop at Oakwood Roofing Office in Kenora to drop off some materials or talk to the staff there. And the message would also include, bring your tool belt. We have a few things to do on the island. I was usually able to free up my weekend to join him. Sometimes it would just be the two of us going out there, but often others would join us for the adventure. Many times the weekend would include Bob, a co-worker from Oakwood Roofing, who also enjoyed getting out to the island. You could tell that the island was Greg's happy place. No phones, no internet, no TV, no radio. Well, no radio most of the time. I had to admit that sitting on the dock in the morning with coffee was almost heavenly. And that would be the only time we'd be sitting around. There was always work to be done out there. I would have to tell Greg in the middle of a project, Greg, it's time to go fishing. He would drop everything and we'd go jump into a boat. Greg enjoyed fishing and he was good at it. The fish in the area were tremendous, so we didn't have to go far to catch. We would fish for a while and then go back to work on the project. Greg was a good man. He was a good friend. Greg was a good brother, brother-in-law, and uncle. Greg was a good husband. He loved you, Lorraine. Greg always made time for his kids and their spouses. Heidi, Kevin and Kate, Teresa and Cal, Katie and Fritchard. You have to know that you were loved by your father. He was always there to help you guys out. Greg was a good father. And to Zopa, it goes without saying that he loved his grandkids. He enjoyed spending time with them. Greg was a good Opa. Greg, you will be missed, but never forgotten. I will miss the adventures with you, the times we would have coffees together. I hope that you are preparing some new adventures for when we meet again.
Wow, what a shock. I wasn't sure I could believe it at first when I heard that Greg Groenheide had passed away. It just didn't seem possible that a man his age would leave us so early. But Lorraine, Heidi, Kevin, Teresa, Katie, I just want to start by saying I'm so sorry for your loss. We've been praying for your family, praying for all the adjustments that come, and for the deep pain that you must still be feeling inside of you. But I was really honored when I had an opportunity to film a little tribute and to talk a little bit about Greg. Greg was a fantastic guy. He was a man that I really, really looked up to. I met him in 1998 when I started as a youth pastor at Oak Bank Baptist Church. And I think it was on the very first Sunday that we attended Oak Bank Baptist Church that Greg and Lorraine invited us over for lunch. And it was a great lunch. Lorraine's a great cook. But at the end of the meal, we had a choice between apple pie and pumpkin pie. And everyone else in the family took apple pie, and I was the only one to take the pumpkin pie. And I remember getting a great big piece of this pumpkin pie, putting the first mouthful in my, first scoop into my mouth, and it tasted awful. Something was really wrong. But I didn't know if it was Lorraine and her cooking or what was happening, but I was a new pastor at the church, and I had to smile and tell her how good it was. But Greg asked for a little slice of pumpkin pie, and when he put it in his mouth and took a bite of it, he spit it out and he says, "Oh, Lorraine, something's wrong. And then Lorraine tasted it, and then she realized she forgot the sugar. So if you can imagine pumpkin pie without the sugar, that's what we were eating. But that was how I met the Groenheide family, at least that side of the family. And I so appreciated my time with Greg. Greg had a lot of things in his life that he enjoyed. He enjoyed vehicles and cars and racing. He loved construction. He loved nature. He loved the lake. There was a lot of things that brought him joy. But I know that for sure his favorite thing was his family. It was very clear that, when we started to talk about family, his eyes would sparkle. He'd smile a little bit. They were his pride and joy. When he talked about Kevin and some of the stuff that Kevin was doing, going to his own business, and when the people started getting married and grandkids, that was absolutely the most important thing in the world to Greg. Greg was a great leader. One of the things that I appreciate about Greg is that he could read people and he could read situations. And I know that there was so many times we'd have a conversation about something in the church or something happening in the town, and afterwards I'd go to Greg, and Greg would share what he was thinking or what he noticed, and it was so helpful for me as a young leader, as a young pastor in the church, to pick up on his wisdom and to hear what he was saying and some of the stuff that he noticed. Greg was great with projects. He was great with thinking about, implicationally about what needs to happen and how we could do certain things. He was always so quick to volunteer, and I really liked that Greg thought big. I mean, he wasn't scared about big projects. He wasn't scared about finances. If this is something that was wise to do, then let's do it. When Kim and I were finished pastoring at the church, we joined a missions organization called YWAM, started working around the world, and in 2013 we moved to Fiji, and a tribe of people in the hills had offered some land to us, and we were going to start a Bible school and a medical clinic and a couple of other projects on the land. We had 34.5 acres of land, and I knew right away that I needed some help. And the first person I thought of was Greg. And so I called Greg one night, and then we started sending emails back and forth, and it was just a couple of months later that Greg bought a plane ticket and he came to Fiji. I think he was there for about 3 weeks, and Greg and I went around Fiji and went to visit this tribe of people in the jungle, and I loved it. I loved seeing Greg, this kind of short white guy from Canada, walking through the jungle with all my brown Polynesian friends. And Greg was fantastic. He wasn't worried about things. He enjoyed it. He asked a lot of good questions. I remember this one guy, Petu, who was a famous wild boar hunter. He'd go kill boar with a spear, and Greg was so curious about how that worked. And so we had a couple of meals just sitting in the jungle around a fire, eating wild boar with Greg. And of course, we spent time on the project and making plans for that. But, Greg gave me some great advice on that I'm so glad that I followed. I have some pictures that I'd like to throw up on the screen here with Greg. One of the things that I'll never forget is how he was helping unravel a giant thing of rope that we had tangled up at the house, probably 200 or 300 feet of rope that was tangled so bad I wanted to throw it out. But Greg was a person of patience and perseverance, and he says, let me at it. And so for about 3 nights, 3 or 4 hours a night, he sat in there in the porch kind of in the evening. It wasn't so hot, and he unraveled that rope. He figured it out. he persevered and he found solutions. And really, I think that kind of sums up a lot of what I saw in Greg, is that perseverance, that working hard, figuring things out. And of course, he was a man of faith. He was a man who was willing to buy his own plane ticket, come to Fiji if it was going to advance God's kingdom and help people to come into a fuller understanding of the God that created them. So glad that I could share this. And Lorraine, continue to pray for you. Kim and I send all of our love from Victoria here in BC.
Hello, everyone. It's so wonderful to see all of you here today to honor my brother Greg. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Shirley Davidson, Greg's youngest sister. And my brothers, Jim, Jeff, and I would like to share a few memories of Greg. I'll start by reading Jeff's, who lives in Delaware in the US, and he couldn't be here today, but he was able to see Greg a week before he passed away. As Greg's youngest brother, my earliest memories of him and I took place when I was about 6 or 7 years old. He took me for a ride on his motorcycle in the back field of our home on Emerson Avenue in North Kildonan. I remember a feeling both of a rush of excitement and fear all at the same time, and yet a trust that I knew he would not put me in any danger. Then another time when we were all sitting around at the kitchen table one morning, me at the very end, as each of us had our own special place, even our own cups or mugs, like Shirley having her spoon and fork with the curved ends, and Mom having a spoon with the bump in the middle, and Bill having the blue metal cup. Somehow you got to know who preferred what with our family. Anyway, this one morning, having a bowl of banana and milk, one of my simple but favorite dishes, I got to finishing eating the bananas and the leftover milk at the bottom, I began to slurp it up loudly, which annoyed Greg greatly, and he gave me one stern look to stop that awful slurping. But of course, I didn't listen, and I kept on going, when suddenly I got a swift back of the head right into the milk, face full of milk. I kind of remember that. It was pretty funny. And we all had a good laugh about that. But as you can imagine, whenever I eat that dish, I rather quietly finish the leftover milk. My last visit with Greg gave me the opportunity to reconnect not only with him, but with his family and my family as well. For this, I am so very grateful and will remember always. Greg, thank you for your spirit, your kindness, and your gentle soul. Love always, Jeff. When I was a little girl, Greg was a teenager and somewhat rebellious, as many teens are. It was the 70s, and Greg had fashionably long hair, and to my parents' dismay. And one evening, the elders from our church came to visit, and they noticed, and Greg walked in, and they noticed his hair. Greg, you need to cut your hair. And Greg didn't say a thing, but his facial expression was, that's not going to happen. Anyone who knows Greg knows you cannot tell him what to do. As a kid, I was a little scared of him, but I also thought he was pretty cool. My husband Bill and I, along with our 4 sons, were transferred to Ottawa in 1993. In the fall of 2002, Greg and Lorraine came to visit us on their way to the Maritimes for their 25th wedding anniversary trip. At that time, I would bike with the kids to school. Greg hopped on Bill's bike and came along. The boys thought that was really cool. Even though it was still cool out and jacket weather, Greg was in a t-shirt and always warm. And the boys started to call him Uncle Heater. That created a loving connection between Greg, Lorraine, and our family. After moving back to Winnipeg, our sons, Mike and Dan, started their careers at Oakwood Roofing and Sheet Metal. As they described it, Greg unlocked the door for them, but it was up to them to open it and make it on their own. Greg never gave them preferential treatment, but he was always there to give them advice, support, and encouragement. Greg was always so proud of them, and they held Greg in such high esteem. For years now, Greg, Lorraine, Jim, Jeanette, and Bill and I would have breakfast together every Saturday morning. He had stories about his grandchildren or the latest car race at Victory Lanes. My husband Bill loved the car races and would often attend to cheer Greg's team on. My son Daniel would make the new fenders for the race truck after they smashed it up. Greg would tell stories about the cottage or about working at Oakwood, and he was always up on current events. It was a wonderful time to connect, to reminisce, to laugh or cry, or just talk about our lives. We will really miss him. He's left a big hole in our lives.
Hello, my name is James Groenheide. I am the second youngest of the family. Greg was the second oldest. As I was growing up, I didn't know Greg very well because of the age gap. He moved out of the house when I was very young. What I do remember is being very afraid of him. To me, he looked like a big, scary guy. In 1996, my wife Jeanette and I bought a house in Oak Bank that happened to be 3 doors down from Greg and Lorraine. We became reacquainted, although we didn't really get to know one another until 2000. That was the year we moved our mother into Kin Place Personal Care Home here in Oak Bank. Jeanette and I would pick Dad up and bring him to visit her for the day. On Saturdays, we would take him for breakfast, first to what was then Gnu's restaurant, now Peppercorns. One Saturday, we saw Greg and Lorraine having breakfast there, and we joined them. That was the beginning of 23 years of Saturday morning breakfast together. We've changed places over the years, starting at Gnu's, then Sal's on the Bridge, Sal's on Regent, and now it's Ben and Florentine's. We had tried other restaurants through the years, but if the sausage and coffee weren't to Greg's liking, we would not return. Ben and Florentine's passed the test, and now we no longer have to order. Our server knows our usuals. We have always had such fun at breakfast. Jeanette, Greg, and I would be the first to arrive. Lorraine came a little later. We would chat about our week, and Greg would always have stories to share about his kids, grandkids, his job, and his racing. Our visits were always full of laughter, especially when Lorraine arrived, took a look at the holes in Greg's shirt, roll her eyes, and comment on what he was wearing. We looked forward to the twinkle in his eye and that smirk. He loved getting her going. There was always somewhere he had to go after breakfast to work on something which was the reason for the shirt. Either it was for Oakwood, his racing car, or a project with his kids. He put on his cap and we knew it was time to go. Last spring, as I was recovering from my own cancer surgery, a highlight of my day was watching for Greg leaving for and returning from work. He would slow his Oakwood truck down as he passed our driveway, smile and wave. I still expect to see him pass by. 2 weeks ago, his Oakwood truck went by our house for the very last time. It was tough to watch it pass and know he wasn't in it. I am so thankful for the time we were able to spend together and get to know one another over the years. Anyone who knew him knows what a kind-hearted person he was. We miss him. We miss seeing him at breakfast. We miss our chats and his laughter. The wave from his truck as he passed our house on his way home from work. I really love that guy, and am blessed to call him my brother.
Good afternoon. I'm Ron Jansen, and I'm Lorraine's brother and Greg's brother-in-law. It was the mid-'70s, and I was just a teenager when I met Greg. And so since I'm about 36 now, that means I knew him for most of my life. The first impressions or memories I have of Greg was he had this really awesome pickup truck when they started dating. And it had pinstriping that was just beautiful all over the truck. And he also had cab lights on the truck. And my parents insisted on their daughter being home by a certain hour every night. And Greg is a clever guy. He figured out how to line up his pickup truck exactly behind the shed. So Lorraine was technically home by the appointed hour, but the cabs of that truck light were right above the shed, and that's all we could see for about half an hour, 40 minutes before she actually came in the house. But you know, it wasn't long before that beautiful, beautiful truck was loaned even to a young teenager like me. And so began a lifetime of me receiving and Greg giving. Giving to me, giving to my family, giving to his community. And as I thought about memories of Greg, the theme very quickly became Greg gives and others receive. I had 2 jobs with Greg. One started even before Oakwood Roofing. Yes, there was a time before Oakwood Roofing. Advance Roofing and Alpine Drywall. They hired a completely green kid who learned how to drink coffee because he was too lazy to load trucks in the morning, and that's what you had to do if you didn't drink coffee. But Greg got me a job there, and that started, for me, many great jobs that took me all the way through university very comfortably. Eventually, I also had a job at Oakwood Roofing, and I remember the day I showed up on the roof, and I had brand new roofing boots, and the first thing Greg did was dip a stick into a bucket of tar and smear it on my boots, and he said, "Okay, now you're a roofer." We also did a lot of sports together. We played hockey, we played baseball, we golfed, we Nordic skied, we fished. For a brief time during university, I think I was maybe the only non-Dutchman on the Saints hockey team, and that was because of Greg as well. Our family had a tradition for many years, almost 10 years, of going to Black Lake and fishing on the long weekend. And that had its generation with Greg as well, who had good experience in that area, taking kids from this community and I think from connections with his church out to Nopaming over many years. And so we said, hey, let's do that as a family. And that began many great memories of fishing at Black Lake with the brother-in-laws and the kids. I remember going to the racetrack and being in the pits with Greg. I remember many checks with donations from Greg and Lorraine for various events that I was involved in over the years. I could always count on their support. I remember many great Christmas parties at the house with Greg and Lorraine and family barbecues. Many ways in which I met Greg's family and friends in ways that I haven't met extended family of other in-laws that I have. Greg was just that way. He wanted to share and bring you into his circle. In the last number of weeks, when he was in the hospital, I took to giving Greg a word of blessing when I would leave the room. And sometimes he would be conscious and comfortable. Sometimes he'd be struggling and trying to stay awake. But he never failed to reply to my blessing. And he always said, I am at peace. The blessing I gave him comes from the benediction we were given in church for, I think, probably decades, and so I will never forget it. And it gives me great comfort. So one last time for Greg. God bless you and keep you. God make his face to shine upon you and give you peace. And you know what Greg is saying.
All right. I guess it was 1984. I was 19, and Greg would have been 29. I met Greg through a friend of mine who was working with Greg, and he thought it'd be a good idea to bring this kid from southern Manitoba to Winnipeg to help on this really tough roofing job, and that was my introduction to Greg. We started. It was a winter job, so we started in I'm guessing around October, and we were doing the roof on the Winnipeg Airport, their steam room or their cooling tower or something like that. It was a really, really tough roofing job. As a matter of fact, since that job, I've realized how simple roofing really is. But anyways, I met Greg there. We started that roofing job. I was just a laborer, and Greg was my foreman. And it went right through the winter. It was a 5-day job. Everybody would show up on the job for 5 days, but on Saturday it was just me and Greg. Me and Greg and his brother Jack would come and help on Saturdays. And we struggled at that job, ripping it off 1 square inch at a time. And I remember when it was getting warmer. It was the end of the winter, and we were getting to the part where we were going to gravel. We had the insulation all down, and we were graveling the roof. And you would bring the gravel up in buckets, and then you'd wheelbarrow it through the roof. And Greg was pouring hot tar, and he had one guy that was spreading the gravel, and then my job was to just make sure that everything was staying full and carting the gravel back and forth. Everybody's working on the job, doing their job, and Greg went to the hoist, had run out of fuel, so he would go and fuel up the hoist and start it up so that the gravel could continue to come up. And he would start cranking and cranking and cranking on that, what is it, a Wisconsin motor, some kind of a antique. But he would crank and crank, trying to start this engine to bring up the gravel, and he just couldn't get it to run. It was firing, but it wouldn't start, and he had filled it with gas, and he was choking, and he was trying not choking, and he was trying everything, and I would cart my gravel, and I would come by the hoist, and I would say to Greg, I think it's not getting fuel. And then I'd take my next load, and I'd go and deliver it where it was going and come back, and Greg, it's not getting fuel. Everybody knows that when it's backfiring through the muffler, it's lean. It's not getting fuel. If it's backfiring through the carburetor, well, then it's burning rich. Everybody knows that. But Greg is cranking and cranking and cranking. And he would not give up. And finally, when I came and I was telling him, Greg, it's not getting fuel. And he'd say, I have it filled up. It's full of fuel. I'm choking it. It's got lots of fuel. And I said, no, it's not getting fuel. And he was already cutting the head off, and he had, with his crescent wrench, he had that thing disassembled. He was adamant that this thing was going to run, and I guess he was fed up with my comments. He finally grabs the whole thing and throws it down, and he says, clean it up, you effing rookie. and then he, back in those days, of course, then you didn't have cellular phone, so he would go into the building and phone Harriet or whoever the little Frenchman at Oakwood, and the Frenchman would come out and fix the engine, and so he could continue this job because it was really close to finishing. And so Greg would come out of the building, and by the time he was out, I had already reassembled the engine. I had already removed the carb. I'd cleaned out the carb, put it back on, and fired it up, and it's running. And he comes to there, "What did you do?" And I said, "Well, it was something caught in the carb and cleaned it up, and everything was fine." So we finished that job, and Greg comes to me at the end of the job and says, "Peter, you won't be needed here any longer. You can, you will go work with a different crew." And so I got demoted to Nick Pizak, the Polish crew. Nobody spoke English. Okay, so maybe there was another hard roofing job. It was the same job, but this one was with pitch. And I didn't know what pitch did. And everything on that crew was derelict or broken. Greg had all the best stuff. And we get on to Nick's job. It was the old International. It was all the bent up tools, and somehow he managed to get his work done. When I think of Greg, I think of him as a ship. I think he is, and not just a ship. Greg is like, he's a freighter. Why is he a freighter? He has this immense capability to carry a huge load, and you cannot turn him around. You can alter his course, but it takes a long time. Once he has his course established, there's only one way to go. And you can come with, or you can stay behind, but he will stay on that course. And when I got to know Greg, I didn't know about this thing called roofing or flat roofing, or for that matter, I was a young kid from southern Manitoba, and but I did learn a lot sitting together with him, drinking coffee in that old 81 Toyota diesel. Saturday coffee break, he'd be sharing coffee with me. I guess that's where I learned how to drink my coffee black. And we'd be the only ones that show up for work on Saturday, and I learned how to roof with Greg. And if I look at Greg and if I look at his effect on me, I can clearly see that he had a huge impact on my life. If I look at my wife, his wife's sister, if I look at his avocation, his roofing, if I look at what he did, all of that, somehow it spilled over onto me. And I've been just horrendously blessed by having even just known him. And, but anybody that says that Greg, family came first, that's not true. Sorry, guys. Everybody knows with Greg, work came first. And why I know that is because he told me when I was planning to get married, he says, if you're not going to work, you don't have to have a family. So work came first, and then if you worked, then you could have a family. And that's one of the things I learned from Greg. Well, and the other thing, I guess, is, was it nimbusal? Imbecile, I'm not sure which word it is. I learned that word from, I didn't know what it was. I heard this word from him. and he would say it often, and after I worked for, had my tour of duty with Nick Pizak, I did get a chance to work with Greg again, and these jobs that Harry talks about, Churchill in northern Manitoba, I'm well versed in some of the early ones, and they were a lot of fun. I did enjoy those a lot, and I had never known of this thing called Monty Python, and he would tell these jokes about Monty Python, and he would laugh hysterical, and we would sit there drinking our black coffee, and I didn't think it was that funny, but he would repeat those again and again and again. He sure liked Monty Python. Anyways, it's been a very good pleasure to have known Greg. He's been a big blessing for me in every way.
This is Claire. What was your favorite thing to do with Opa?
Reading books. I loved it when Opa took us fishing. I will miss working the turtle stories. Opa was really good at driving the boat to the cabin. My favorite place to be with Opa was at the cabin. Opa was kind, smart, and my favorite Opa. And I will miss Opa. Opa is the best because he tells Martin the turtle stories.
Hi, my name is Eli. Opa was the best ever. My favorite thing to do with Opa was fishing. A favorite memory is when I was little, he let me eat pudding in the race truck. He was really good at fixing things. He taught me how to fish. He always said, "Imagine that." And after I tripped over something, he said, "Watch out for that." I will miss getting hugged by Opa. On one cheek and then the other.
Hi. I was worried about not being able to say enough about Dad, but now I see that everybody else who has spoken has captured each of the parts of Dad that I love so much, so I don't have to say it all. The easiest way I could think to do this was just to write to Dad, so I'll just try and read quick. Hi, Dad. Here we are, all together, gathered to say nice things about you and cry and eat and hug and laugh. You know how you'd say, "How about them Jets?" when things got too emotional or personal? You'd be saying that lost today. Writing this is so difficult, so I'm just going to take the advice that you often gave me when I got overwhelmed, which was pretty often, and I'll just take one thing at a time. First things first, a joke. Why do Dutchmen have bald heads and big ears? They're always going, "How much?" I'll see you. Next, some thank yous. Thank you for teaching me how to fish. I don't come from a fishing family. In fact, my dad threw an entire fishing rod out of the boat one time trying to cast. And you taught me the art of jigging. And ever since that cold day in May on Black Lake, I've been hooked. Put dad jokes in. Thanks for finishing all the puzzles I ever started and then quit once all the easy parts were done. Thank you for always making the morning coffee at the cabin. Thanks for letting me race the super stock. Thanks for scoring me a pair of Oakwood overalls. Thanks for all your good advice, like cut towards your chum, not towards your thumb. And if you're not sure, at least be certain. And also, measure once, cut twice. And I said that right. Thanks for being the guy many of us called when we needed help moving or were stuck or broken down. You always showed up. Thanks for showing Kevin what being a great husband looks like. Your love for Mom was strong and unwavering. Thanks for being an awesome Opa to our kids, for showing up at their hockey, dance, soccer, Christmas plays, birthday parties, for telling them your stories and caring to hear theirs, for patiently teaching them how to bait hooks, net fish, steer the boat, and not catch anyone's line or life jacket or finger or head with their hook. For helping them learn manners and respect and proper etiquette for sneaking Grandma's cookies out of the freezer. Thanks for loving them so well and hugging them on both cheeks. Thanks for encouraging us. Kevin has said that this is one of the things he'll miss the most. You listened, you cared, you encouraged, and many of us are better roofers, drivers, fishermen, skaters, neighbors, and humans because of your steady, positive input. You saw the good. You spoke truth and life. Thanks for showing us what living a life of faith looks like. You weren't one to talk a lot about your walk with God, you just walked it. You were patient and kind, generous, humble, unselfish, and faithful, and you faced trials with strength, courage, and trust. It is what it is, was a constant saying of yours. You approached all of the discomfort and uncertainty of the last few years with calm bravery. You didn't even balk at immunotherapy after being told there was a risk of hair loss. You're so brave. Thanks for being an incredible dad. You're the best father-in-law I've ever had. And I'm honored to be your favorite daughter-in-law. It doesn't matter that I'm the only one. I've learned so much from you in the last 16 years since I hugged my way into the family and started talking about feelings and begging to go to the island. I've learned that that saying about Dutchmen is true. Wooden shoes, wooden head, wouldn't listen. I've learned that there are very few things worth getting upset about in life. One of them was a boat named Gilligan, and the other was any bump on the racetrack that put you into the wall on the front straightaway. I've learned how important it is to spread jam all the way to the edge of toast. I've learned that you can take 8 words at the end of a prayer and make them into one. We ask this all in Jesus' name, amen? I've learned a lot about offside, icing, special teams, and defensive pairings, and how to ref an entire hockey game from an armchair. I've learned the value of enjoying quality time in nature with people you love, and how much joy can be found in drinking morning coffee by the lake. I can't imagine what the island will be like without you. You're the heart of why we love it so much. Everything will be different now as we walk forward in this awful reality of our lives without you. We'll watch Jets games, drink coffee, not black like you did, eat Oli Bolin, open presents, cut cake, go fishing, mow grass, play hockey, and sneak Mom's cookie out of the freezer without you, all the while wishing you were still here. We'll share memories of your steadfast love, your wit, stubbornness, and habits. We'll stick together and we'll hold Mom close. We'll tell and retell all the Opa stories to the little ones and do our best to walk in the footprints you've left through our lives. All of the kind things people are saying about your true dad. You're a very good man, husband, brother, uncle, son, father, Opa, and friend. Not a great race car driver, but that's okay. And we carry and we honor your legacy of living well and loving deeply.
I have permission this afternoon to speak for the both of us, so I'm going to do that. Just want to thank everybody today for coming. This is so overwhelming to see the amount of people, the sheer amount of people that are here. I'd like to share one of my most cherished memories of Greg. In 2015, we as a family took a vacation to Orlando. So I bought a pair of tickets to an Orlando Magic game versus the Phoenix Suns. I knew Dad wasn't a basketball fan, but I asked Teresa if she thought that Dad would want to go. And she said that Greg just loves sports, any sport. So I bought an extra ticket for him. Greg and I didn't have a lot in common. When I first met him, I think he thought that I was one more person to work on the race truck, and I think he realized very quickly I was not that guy. We didn't have a lot in common, but him and I always found a common ground in sports. I'd never been to a live NBA regular season game before, and neither had Greg, so I was happy that we were experiencing this together. I'm not an Orlando Magic fan. I've been a lifelong San Antonio Spurs fan, but that night, Dad and I cheered that team like they were our own. I don't remember. I don't remember what the score was that night. But I do remember Victor Oladipo, the point guard for the Orlando Magic that night, pulling up to the three-point arc, draining a shot, marking 40 points for him that night. And Greg raised both arms in the air and cheered like it was his team. It was a wonderful night. I'm going to ask Milo. Milo, do you want to share a memory of Opa? No? Okay. I said maybe if you change your mind, that's okay. Ava, would you like to share a memory of Opa? Yeah? What do you remember, or what will you miss about Opa?
I love you, Opa.
That says it all, I guess. It's been mentioned before that Greg loved country music, and again, Greg and I didn't have a whole lot in common. But we both agreed that old country music was the best country music. And I'm reminded of the immortal words of a Hank Williams. Lord, build me a cabin in the corner of glory land, in the shade of the tree of life, that it may ever stand, where I can just hear the angels sing and shake Jesus' hand. Lord, build me a cabin in the corner of glory land. Slowly, I have come to some sobering realizations that you won't be there to greet my kids with a big bear hug, that you're not there to talk about the last play that might have saved the Jets from getting scored on. You're not here to remind us that a 3-0 lead is the worst lead in hockey. You're not there to debate with me whether the bomber should kick it away or go for it on a 2 and out. I can't call you when I need help with fixing something around the house. You're not there to tell us stories about what it was like when you were growing up and how different things are now. You're not there to borrow my chainsaw yet again. You're not there for me to tell you that I hope to be as good of a father as you were to your own kids. And you're not there to see Milo Neva reach important milestones. And you're not there to say to us, I'm here for you. Regardless, I'm so glad that I had this time with you. Words cannot express how much I will miss you. You always made me feel welcome in your house, and you made me feel like part of your family. You made me feel like part of your family when I asked for your daughter's hand. You always made time for your grandkids. It was so evident that you lived for them. You would drop everything, you would come running when any of your kids needed help. I never heard you complain or raise your voice. You were the kindest, most gentlest person I've ever met. And you always put people's needs first. And you hated it when people would fuss over you. Even when you were in the hospital in so much pain, and the pain was too much. Most of all, you were a man after God's heart. And I can see why he wanted you closer to him. So rest now, Dad. Enjoy that cabin in Glory Land.
Promise what I have to share is short. I'm Katie. I'm one of Greg and Lorraine's daughters. I have my backup here with me in case I can't get through this. I asked my two daughters, Emma and Olivia, if they wanted to share anything today, and they felt pretty shy to do that. But Emma did want to say that she wanted to tell Opa that she loved him, and Olivia wanted to give him a very big hug. I've thought a lot about what to say today, and it's been quite difficult to come up with anything that feels adequate. So I'm thankful that we were sort of able to share that load, because I think between all of us, we definitely have it covered. Dad was just the best dad that we could have had. He was kind and he was hardworking. He had an awesome ability to be both respectful of others while always remaining firm and faithful to what he believed. He was funny, and he told us all sorts of silly things when we were kids, and one of the most memorable for me is that if you drink coffee, you will grow a mustache. And he had me believing that for a number of years. So, yes, should have used a bigger font. He had my full trust. He was so dependable and always willing to help us when it was needed. But he also made a point of pushing us when it was needed, which was a great quality to have. One of my favorite memories with him happened on one of our annual fishing trips to Black Lake. And I was a preteen, I was just learning how to fish, and Dad was a really good but sort of strict teacher, which would be expected. We were out on the boat, and I thought I had a snag, and Dad said, "Nope, I think that's a fish." And I kind of panicked, because it was really big and I was really overwhelmed by the experience. I was getting pretty upset, actually, and I felt like I couldn't reel the fish in, and I kept saying, "Dad, take the rod, take the rod." And he just wouldn't. He was stubborn, of course, but I think he knew that I needed to go through this, that I needed to have this experience, and he just calmly kept refusing and guiding me on how to reel this fish in, and in the end, yes, I did it. I think he just knew that I needed that push, and that was the kind of wisdom that Dad always held. And I'm going to miss that part of him quite a lot. Everything about this, it just feels very unfair that this ugly disease made its way into his body and stole his life. He lived with such integrity and generosity. He was kind and he was wise. He somehow was never fearful through this whole journey. He was a man of great faith. When he started to get really, really sick from the cancer, I was sitting with him and I said, "Dad, I'm just not ready to say goodbye." And his response was, "Well, then I guess I've done a good job." And I said something like, "Yeah, you've done a really good job, Dad." And he goes, "Well, I'm not done yet." And that was just so him. All we want is to have him back, but again, we want him to feel the joy of heaven and to have no pain. I will miss you forever, Dad, and I love you very much, which is something he said to us every time we left the hospital. I love you very much.
Let me just take a minute and thank those of you who shared a tribute and your memories. I don't know if you ever feel like this, but I sometimes come to a day like this, approach a day like this, where you think you know the person who you are there to really celebrate their life, and yet there's so much that you learn about them. And I think what we can all agree on is we were all much richer people because we had Greg in our life. So thank you, those of you who shared a tribute. You know, in Psalm 31, King David was grieving. We really don't know exactly who he was grieving. Some think it might have been his wife Bathsheba who had passed away. Some think it might have been his son Absalom who had passed away. We just simply don't know, but it becomes obvious as you read this very painful psalm that he was grieving a tremendous loss in his life. And in the midst of that grief, these were just a few of the words that he wrote. "In you, Lord, I have taken refuge. Let me never be put to shame. Deliver me in your righteousness. Turn your ear to me. Come quickly to my rescue. Be my rock and my refuge, a strong fortress to save me. Since you are my rock and my fortress, for the sake of your name, lead me and guide me. Keep me free from the trap that is set before me, for you are my refuge. In your hands I commit my spirit. Deliver me, Lord, my faithful God." And I know that there's a lot of people that can relate to this next section. He says, "You knew the anguish of my soul. Be merciful to me, Lord, for I am in distress. My eyes grow weak with sorrow, my soul and body with grief. My life is consumed by anguish. My strength fails because of my affliction, and my bones grow weak. I have become like broken pottery," David says. He goes on, "But I trust in you, Lord. I say, you are my God. My times are in your hands. Let your face shine on your servant and save me with your unfailing love." Now, let's be honest with each other today. I mean, grief and grieving are something that none of us like going through. But one of the things that I appreciate so much about David's transparency in this psalm is that in the season of pain and grief that he's going through, he's not sugarcoating it, is he? In verse 2, he pleads with God, "Come quickly to my rescue." He asks God to be my rock and my refuge, a strong fortress to save us in our time of despair and disillusionment. He pleads with God for guidance. In verse 6, he says, "You know the anguish of my soul." And he goes on to say, "I'm in distress. My eyes grow weak with sorrow. My life is consumed by anguish. My strength fails, and my bones grow weak." But after saying that, there's a noticeable shift in this psalm. David closes it off in a way that is very different from the way that he starts it. In fact, there's this profound shift that he makes, and his perspective is incredibly important that we understand it. And he makes statements in the closing part of this psalm. He says, "But I trust in you, Lord. I say, you are my God." He says, "My times are in your hands." He says, "How abundant are the good things that you have stored up for those who fear you, that you bestow in the sight of all on those who take refuge in you." David says, "In my alarm, I said, I'm cut off from your sight, O God. Yet you heard my cry for mercy when I called to you for help." And again, let's be honest with each other today. I mean, not all of us can find that perspective when we grieve. I mean, we all understand the first part, don't we? We all get the I'm in distress, my eyes grow weak with sorrow. My life is consumed by anguish, my strength fails, and my bones grow weak. I mean, we all, in our grief, we get that, don't we? We understand that, we feel that. But not all of us find the other part, do we? Not all of us find the good things that you, God, have stored up for those who fear you, that you bestow in the sight of all on those who take refuge in you. We don't all experience that. And my question is, why do you think that is? You know, Paul in the New Testament book of 1 Thessalonians says that we don't have to grieve like people who have no hope. And the point that Paul is trying to make in that passage is that when there's no hope, people just grieve differently. But I'm here to tell you, we are not here today to grieve like that. We have gathered here today as people who have hope. We are gathered here today as people of hope. And what gives us hope is that we know that Greg understood something profound about this thing that we call life. He knew that the life that we live in this earthly shell is only part of our story. And it's only part of the race that we have been called to run. You know, it's rather appropriate that all throughout Scripture we're told that life can be compared to a race. And it's rather ironic, don't you think, that Greg loved racing, because that is an image that's carried through both the Old and the New Testament. Our earthly race begins the day that we're born, and our earthly race ends the day that we pass into eternity. And the lane that you choose to run in can make all the difference. I have a feeling that if Greg could have written my words to you today, that he would want all of you to know that he understood the lane that he was racing in. I've always found it interesting the way that Paul talks about this race in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. And at the point that he's trying to make is that we're all involved in a race, all of you, all of us. But not everyone gets the trophy at the end. Paul's making the point that there are people who choose the wrong lane, that there are people who don't finish the race that they're called to run, and that there are even some people who start running the race but yet choose not to finish it because they discover that racing is just hard work. Paul puts it this way. He says, Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? He says, run in such a way that you get the prize. He goes on, everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, do not run like someone running aimlessly. Do not fight like a boxer beating the air. You know, Greg's family and the people who really knew him will tell you that his most important race had nothing to do with his truck, did it? And the ultimate trophy that he was working for wasn't that big, huge, impressive, massive trophy that's sitting on the table out there. Although that's a very impressive trophy, let me tell you. I have won one trophy in my life. It was about this big, and I was 6 years old. That is an impressive trophy. But what Greg wanted more than anything else was that when his race was over, he wanted to have finished the most important race well. He wanted to finish the race well, the race that really mattered. You see, Greg loved Jesus. Greg knew that when this race was over, that his truck wasn't coming with him. And he knew that when he passed away, that his trophies were staying put here on earth. And Greg would want all of you to know today that he hadn't been training for a crown that would not last, but he strove for the crown that would last forever. Oh, I know that some of you know what Paul is talking about in this passage that I just read. I know that you understand what he's talking about when he talks about that crown, but I also realize in a crowd this size, in a group like this, that some of you probably don't understand what that is. I also know that people we know and people we love and people that we care about, when they pass away, and when we come together on a day like today to remember them and celebrate their life and to gain strength from one another and comfort, that oftentimes we think in a different way about our own lives. We think about the race that we are running. And we're forced to remind ourselves that one day, for all of us, we are going to cross that earthly finish line, just like our friend Greg did. And my friends, on that day, it's too late to ask the question, what kind of race do I want to run? Days like today, when maybe our hearts are just a little softer to God. And when thinking about eternity and what the life that we live in this shell really means. Days like today can be days when we seriously look at the lane that we have chosen to race in. The lane that Greg chose to race in can be summed up with these two verses, and I'm going to close with this. The first is John 3:16, one that many of you are familiar with. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. And the second verse that sums up the lane that Greg was running in is found in Romans chapter 3, and it says this. It says, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and all are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. My friends, if you are considering a possible lane change in the race of life that you currently find yourself in, these verses are a great place to start. Would you bow your heads with me? Lord, we thank you that we can gather here and not feel the need to sugarcoat our pain. We thank you that we can come and lay our grief at your feet, knowing that you understand it. We thank you that we can come here and, much like King David did, pour out our pain and our confusion to you. We thank you, Jesus, that you meet us where we are and provide for us the comfort and perspective that we need. Lord, I pray that if there is someone here today who you have been speaking to about the race that they have been running, maybe you're calling them back to the race that makes their crown and their trophy that they receive at the finish line something very different than what it currently is. Lord, I pray that you would give them the courage to take the next steps today. Lord, I thank you for being you. We ask that as we move down to the basement for a time of connecting around the tables, Lord, bless our fellowship with one another and comfort us as we share the food that has been prepared. Jesus, thank you for your presence with us. In your name we pray. Amen. Well, on behalf of the family, I want to thank you again for being here today. Your presence brings a tremendous amount of comfort, and they look forward to connecting with each of you around the tables downstairs. Just a moment, I'm going to dismiss the family first. I'm going to let them go downstairs so they can get settled around the tables. And as they are being dismissed, we're going to close our service with a song that was near and dear to Greg. The family requested that this song be played as they are being dismissed, and I would encourage you to sing it if you are familiar with the words. To the best of my knowledge, and Howard might be able to know better than me, but to the best of my knowledge, this song isn't in the hymnals, and we don't have the words up on the screen. So if you know it, we ask that you would sing it and make up for those people who don't know it. And again, we want to thank you for being here today. May our Lord bless you and keep you. Amen.
Hello out there, we're on the air, it's hockey night tonight. Tension grows, the whistle blows, and the puck goes down the ice. The goalie jumps and the players bump and the fans all go insane. Someone roars, Bobby scores at the good old hockey game. Oh, the good old hockey game is the best game you can name. And the best game you can name is the good old hockey game. Second period, where players dash with skates aflash, the home team trails behind, but they grab the puck and go bursting up, and they're down across the line. They storm the crease like bumblebees, they travel like a burning flame. We see them slide the puck inside, it's a 1-1 hockey game. Oh, the good old hockey game is the best game you can name, and the best game you can name is the good old hockey game. Third period, last game in the playoffs too. Oh, take me where the hockey players face off down the rink, and the Stanley Cup is all filled up for the champs who win the drink. Now the final flick of a hockey stick and a one gigantic scream. The puck is in, the home team wins the good old hockey game. Oh, the good old hockey game is the best game you can name, and the best game you can name is the good old hockey game. Oh, the good old hockey game is the best game you can name, and the best game you can name